Welcome to the Alt Asset Allocation Podcast, exploring alternative investment opportunities available to the everyday investor. Here's your host, Ben Lakoff.
Hello and welcome to the Alt Asset Allocation Podcast. Today's interview is with Ben Roy. NFTs, they're dead right now, according to the media, again, but all you have to do is spend a little time in our own little echo chamber over here to see that they're very much not dead. This is a double Ben episode. Fun fact, we're both part of BenDAO, which is a group of over 60 Bens online. Gotta love it. Anyways, in this Benterview, we go into detail on what's happening in the NFT market and what Ben thinks could be interesting. Before you listen, please don't forget to like or subscribe, or even better, leave a review. If you're watching this on YouTube, please subscribe to the channel and or give the video a thumbs up. These sort of things really help other people find the podcast, and I appreciate it. All right, Ben Roy on the NFT market. Enjoy. Ben, welcome to the Alt Asset Allocation Podcast. Excited to have you on today, sir.
Awesome, Ben. Super fun. Been looking forward to it for a while.
You know, I realize as you're doing the intro, I'll share this in BenDAO, which is a group of 58 other Bens. It just seems crazy to not have shared this recording with them as we're going on to it. This is being recorded live on Twitter Spaces, which is pretty fun. Allow for a little period at the very, very end for Q&A if we have time. But otherwise, you know, recording this and putting it up as a podcast anyways. But yeah, I have known you as a person from the internet for years now. And then I think just before this was probably the first time I've ever seen your face, though. It's all been audio.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, but for the rest of my listeners, let's start off with brief background, who you are, where you are, and how you got into the space.
Yeah, sounds good, man. No, it's super fun to be able to meet friends from the internet. I think it's probably been almost 2 years since we've known each other as, little display pictures. But yeah, by way of background, I got into crypto in 2019 after working in Ottawa. I'm Canadian. I'm based in Vancouver. My kind of previous career was working in policy, specifically around international trade stuff. And so maybe, a bit of a weird sort of pathway into crypto, but I guess most people's stories are. And so came across stuff this is, I guess, bear market times, and was on a bit of an internet rabbit trail. And I think Bitcoin had come up as like sort of the conversation around it being a macro asset in these like international trade sort of circles as a bit of a joke. And so, double clicked on that and went down the rabbit hole, so to speak. And just sort of spent 2019 mostly learning, just trying to figure out like, okay, what's Bitcoin? Like, what's Ethereum? How do blockchains work? And so kept my job, and I was reading, I think I read about half a dozen books, like 5 or 6 books on like the history of computing, like what's distributed systems, like just what the hell is this thing? Like what's cryptography? How does it make sense? Like I remember trying to read the Bitcoin white paper and being like, I don't know any of these concepts. So I have to figure out how to sort of put them in order in my head. And fast forward sort of through to 2020, after doing that for a little while, picked up my first job in the space for kind of a small startup called Geyser, which is, I think, probably how we would have first interacted with each other, Ben. And yeah, it was just super interesting to learn, like, this is, I guess, sort of through DeFi summer and onwards, building a little software tool, kind of a staking solution, which still exists and is still used and has a bunch of different sort of a suite of tools, we'll say, for DeFi development. And yeah, kind of that was my first entry kind of full on into the space, and have kind of been around since. And through 2021, I spent a bunch of time working for a company called Tribute Labs, which is a DAO operating company that effectively helps run a bunch of different investment DAOs in the space, including Flamingo DAO and the Lao and Neon DAO. And so learned a lot through that. And I guess the last piece of this here is have started a few of my own projects since. One of those is called Accelerate Art, which is a nonprofit around kind of the digital art space and doing shows both in kind of the virtual worlds, and also kind of, we did a show in New York for NFT NYC, and just trying to help emerging artists, basically. And then the second piece being an NFT project specifically called Good Minds, which intentionally was like a bunch of friends of mine decided, it would be interesting to try and build an NFT project from scratch, and then use that as a bit of a test net to help other, protocols and projects in the NFT space succeed. So yeah, effectively like your friendly neighborhood PFP project that's around if you need some help or you need a test user base. And that brings me to today. So that's kind of the quick spiel.
Nice. Yeah, and it was Geyser that where I met you. And for my listeners, episode 15. So this is November 2020. I actually sat down with Pre from the Lao, so decentralized venture investing. So pretty early days of that. Pretty interesting what Tribute Labs and the Lao and Flamingo DAO are doing. Cool. Look, there's a million different ways we could start this off. Let's start off with NFTs a little bit, like double click there. So presumably at this point, you're kind of the, air quote, NFT guy with your friends and family. There's always like those people that just don't, air quote, get it. And you have to like give them some story or some context to kind of get them over the line on why NFTs could have value. Do you have a good way of like describing this to the people that don't quite get it yet, that helps them better understand why these things might have value?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it depends on the age group of the person that I'm talking to. So if they're like sub 35, at least until recently, my example was like, imagine if Kanye West created like a Snapchat filter that you could own, some sort of digital object basically, or customization tool. Would that be interesting to you? Like, do you think people would buy that? And most people, would say, well, yeah, I mean, it seems interesting. If say there's only 1,000 of these things, and that kind of being a bit of a Trojan horse into just like the idea of digital scarcity. Like we have, so much culture happening online. Doesn't it just make sense that, now we figured out how you could have like digitally scarce file types that can capture images or music or memes or things that could kind of contain value. And usually that's kind of like a decent entry point into conversations, though I still get made fun of for sure as like the NFT person, especially given, market conditions kind of nuking over the last. For people who are older, I try and think about it more through the lens of music. Not that like, I mean, music NFTs are a bit of a meme in crypto circles because there hasn't really been a model that's worked, but it's just a different way of being able to express the same comment, which is to say like, there is value in owning digital assets. Imagine if you could own like a piece of an artist's song or catalog from, early days. Like say you got into, I don't know, Elton John or something like early in his career. You think, that stuff would hold value? And the kind of obvious answer is, well, yeah. And, kind of pitching NFTs as a digital version of that seems to make sense for people. And yeah, so I would gauge it differently, based on the age of the person. But those are a couple versions of the pitch.
Yeah, I like those, and it definitely needs to be tailored based on that person's experience. I think of this story. I was meeting a friend of a friend, let's call it, and it was an older fella, and I was explaining, what I did with charged particles and how it does certain things with NFTs, and he was shaking his head and like seemed like he was understanding the whole time. And then, like near the end of my spiel, and I'd been talking, and he'd been active listening, so I thought he was like getting it. He stops me and he goes, "Oh, you do computer stuff." I was like, "Oh shit,
Yeah,
definitely should have led with that," and did not realize you were that lost the entire time, sir. I definitely
for sure.
being aware of adjusting it based on who you're talking to. So with NFTs right now, I mean, there's a bit of the narrative that NFTs are dead, volumes are down substantially, et cetera, et cetera. Let's start off. I mean, this is being recorded in November 2022. What's kind of the state of the NFT market, and what areas are you finding most interesting?
Both good questions. I think, yeah, state of the NFT market is what I would say is not great. I think some of the sort of core assets like CryptoPunks or Bored Apes or I guess Art Blocks have made a case for themselves. Like there's a historic reason maybe why some of the people who are from crypto culture land would want to, buy and hold and own these, whether that's like status symbol wise or as an investment thesis over a long period. But beyond that, as soon as you kind of get out of the top crop of NFTs, it becomes a bit tricky. Most stuff is down, very significantly. Even those core assets are down very significantly. I think the kind of critique from normal, normie land is that NFTs are kind of dead. Look at this asset class that sort of the bubble popped and this kind of thing. So I don't know. I would say generally speaking, like its markets have been down, sentiment's not great, but it's still, interesting seeing like an entirely new asset class that didn't really exist even 2 years ago, holding the volumes that it has held and, holding the prices that it's held. And so to me, I'm actually quite optimistic. I think, it's never fun to see stuff go down, sometimes like 90% or more. People who have been around have both made a lot of money and lost a lot of money. Um, but yeah, I think we're kind of in the trough ultimately, kind of after the initial euphoria that happens in any kind of new technology. The people who are still like around and building, whether that's like entrepreneurs or collectors or artists, I think are yeah, like having even more conviction ultimately, like realizing, okay, markets do what they do, but there's a lot of cool stuff that you can do with this medium. And I think, yeah, if I had to zoom out and sort of think about it personally, I still am kind of more drawn to really two buckets. I would say it's like nerd culture and hype culture. That's kind of how I think about NFTs broadly. Nerd culture being like stuff that is art that is like maybe using the blockchain in a new way that didn't really exist beforehand. So you could have had digital art in 2008, right? I remember actually like watching Beeple videos in my graphic design class when I was in high school, and that like those existed before, but that's not using, just making it an NFT. It doesn't actually take advantage of all the cool things you can do with a blockchain. But something like art blocks, where you actually have like code stored on chain, or terraforms, which goes even a step further, and having all sorts of sort of details around this project physically, or not physically, but like formally on this Ethereum blockchain, creates kind of an interesting and new class of art that, yeah, I think I'm excited about. I think lots of people are excited about, and that's the sort of more nerd culture side of the space. And the hype culture side is, I guess, what you would think it is. Just thinking about bigger companies, something like Artifact and CloneX, and that kind of whole, really like using clones, which is their core NFT, as like a distribution for luxury products, whether that's clothing or other things, and realizing like Nike in many ways like invented hype culture. And NFTs are loosely like an extension of that into the digital realm in a new way. And so I think, yeah, those are kind of the two categories that still, no matter what is going on in sort of, market conditions, still are exciting to me.
Yeah, I like that nerd culture and hype culture. That's a good way to bucket it. That would apply more towards just the art collectibles, though. Do you follow? I mean, NFTs is this wide ranging net that kind of covers a bunch of other things, gaming, metaverse, etc. Or do you follow any of these other kind of goals, I guess?
Yeah, I think so I definitely do. I think maybe more my posture here is like I'm cautiously optimistic, but I haven't really seen too much like, yeah, like make a case for itself, or like have a thesis over the long run. I think art and collectibles to me are like the intuitive first layer, and it's interesting to see some of the projects that I mentioned, and I have a few other projects that I'm interested in, or that I follow. Carve a lane for themselves. But there's definitely like you can use NFTs for version controlling software. You can use NFTs for creating like liquidity providing positions in DeFi. Like there's all sorts of ways you can use NFTs. I think gaming is potentially the one that is both like among the most promising, but also like the most memed and maybe like over talked about. So it hasn't really had its moment in the sun yet. Like I haven't really seen a game that's had traction that's been based in NFTs. I do think we'll get there though, and that's what's exciting. I think there's a lot of projects that are building now, and we'll probably like raise and build over the next like 12 to 18 months that potentially tackle that vertical. But you're right, like it's hard to sort of talk about NFTs as a single like monolithic thing. When I think of NFTs still in my head, I think like art and collectibles and that kind of side of it, because that's really how it took off and when I was drawn in. But yeah, you can use an NFT for a lot of things, and in the same way that you'd be kind of laughed at if you said you're an internet entrepreneur today, where that may have made sense in 2001. I'm not sure like 5 years from now saying like you're in NFTs really will have any meaning. Like it's just got such breadth. Like you could use it, like I've said, for like version controlling software, or for like art projects on chain, or for finance applications, and the list goes on. So in short, yeah, like for sure I'm following lots of stuff, potentially like bullish on particularly the gaming side of things, but yeah, kind of still waiting to see that stuff play out.
Oh yeah, and we'll have a massive renaming. But the funny thing is, like, I hear people say they work in digital advertising. Like, what non-digital advertising? Like newspaper ads and billboards? Like, come on.
Yeah, I'm in the billboard business.
Yeah, it's super targeted, I guess, if you put it in the right spot. One thing I realized I didn't touch on, I mean, so I have a few things that I want to cover. One, your kind of origin story on how you initially got attracted to NFTs and started going down the rabbit hole. And then I want to go into the Fat CryptoPunks thesis that you wrote on Medium, and I'll link that in the show notes. So wherever that kind of fits, but those are the next two I want to cover.
Yeah, awesome. So I think my first exposure to NFTs is actually like right at the beginning of when I got into crypto. So as much as I had sort of a macro, like I came at this from a policy person and as a policy person and bought a little bit of Bitcoin and experimented with that. The first thing I ever bought on Ethereum was like Decentraland and Gods Unchained cards. Because I was like, okay, like Ready Player One, I like that movie. I like this idea of a metaverse. Like maybe I should buy some land in this like virtual world. Seems promising. I'll buy some cards. Like I, grew up sort of collecting Pokemon cards, and that also made sense. So I definitely had sort of a first exposure in back in 2019. So OpenSea was pretty small. There wasn't really a lot going on, and I followed that through kind of DeFi summer as well, which was through 2020. There's kind of a lot of euphoria and development and different builders building things around the finance vertical of crypto, where NFTs were kind of taking a back seat. But I remember in the end of the summer of 2020, there's a project called Don't Buy Meme by Jordan Lyle, who is another sort of builder in the space who's been around for a long time. And the basic concept there was taking a lot of the knowledge that exists in this like DeFi vertical, staking some asset in a contract and using that to like quote unquote farm some secondary asset. He created this concept where you could buy some of his token meme, and you'd be farming pineapple points in a very uniquely crypto kind of crazy environment. And you could use those pineapple points to like purchase different NFTs. Most of these NFTs were just like memes of the core crypto characters like Satoshi and Vitalik and Sergey from Chainlink and things like that. And so while like I got the initial exposure in 2019, in 2020, that was when I was starting like trading these cards. Like I try and earn a bunch of pineapple points, buy my card and sell it on OpenSea kind of thing. And that tipped me off into kind of the CryptoPunks universe and later, art blocks and kind of on from there. But I'd say, initial exposure through kind of OpenSea and Decentraland. And then this like Don't Buy Meme project kind of clicked me back in when in the end of 2020, they stopped calling it DeFi summer and sort of at the time sort of called it NFT winter as the kind of transition from one bubble to the next. And turns out that was quite early, obviously, in this like crazy 2021 and even 2022 extension of like NFTs really having their breakout moment in the whole world. And I guess that can like naturally segue into this essay I wrote on CryptoPunks back in like February, I want to say, of 2021. It was just, in the CryptoPunks Discord, these things weren't super valuable. I think it was there were a couple ETH at the time. So you're looking at whatever, maybe like $1,000 or something. I wish I had an enormous sum of money and had bought all of them and made incredible money in the interim. Alas, that was not the case. I bought I think one and was excited about that and kind of participating in the community. And I feel like there are moments in really any kind of renaissance or innovation era where you just gather a group of really smart people and a lot of interesting stuff comes out of that. And I feel like in crypto, like often that happens in specific Discord servers. And the CryptoPunks like Discord server at that time was it wasn't huge, but it was filled with a lot of really sharp people and really early adopters, people who just got the space far better than I did. And I feel like I learned a lot, and a lot of those people ended up going on to found projects and be like leaders in the space, whether it's like Snowfro and Art Blocks or like D's doing all sorts of NFT stuff, or Justin with Braindrops and G Money. Like there's a lot of these people that did very well for themselves after that. But basically like floated around that Discord for a while, kind of gathered a bunch of the way that they saw CryptoPunks and wrote this essay called the Fat CryptoPunks Thesis. And the long story short, the idea there is that CryptoPunks, given that they're sort of they're not the first NFT at a technical level, but they're among the first NFTs that really like made it click for most people. They combined like the collectability aspect of being able to own sort of a digital item, like a marketplace, sort of a community around that set and that marketplace. Like they invented a lot of the usage of like traits and a little sort of set of characters that like had some sort of scarcity inherent in it. And I felt, and I definitely was not totally original thinking at the time, I want to make sure to emphasize that, and a bunch of other people felt that these could be super valuable and like historic assets. And so the point of this Fat Punks thesis is the idea that people would go out and potentially make money in this like new vertical called NFTs, and probably take some of those profits back to CryptoPunks and want to sort of collect and own those as like almost like a base asset or a reserve currency of this new NFT space, because they were kind of the base, like the core NFT collectible. And I think initially that I think played out a little bit, where people collected CryptoPunks, and they obviously did very well for themselves. But beyond that, it also sort of failed as a thesis as people went on to buy other collectibles and sort of create and store value elsewhere. It turns out not everyone, wanted to be able to buy a punk. They liked pudgy penguins or bored apes or other like collectible. And it was definitely an interesting exercise in like capturing kind of a moment in time where I think a lot of those early folks said, hey, like these CryptoPunks are pretty interesting collectibles, and there probably is going to be a lot of value capture here. And so when I look back on that, I think it's just kind of fun to be able to have a little kind of capsule of history and say, like, I still think CryptoPunks will do very well over time, and there's still in many ways like a case for that thesis. But it was a super interesting kind of early moment in the industry.
Yeah, you said it kind of failed, but a bit. But like, how do you think of, I guess, Lindy effect with these old collections of NFTs that have this value and this name versus like the onslaught of new shiny, the next Bored Ape that seems to launch every couple days? How do you think about where value flows in the NFT market overall with this dynamic?
Yeah, I think the way that I look at it is like it depends on kind of the timing of a given market. So in a bull cycle, a lot of people are looking for kind of the next big thing, and they want to, mint an NFT for super cheap and hopefully sell it for a bunch more money and, make money that way. And in the same way that sort of like Bitcoin isn't a super attractive asset in a bull market because it only goes up so much and people want to kind of hunt other, cool coins to buy and flip, these core assets like a CryptoPunk, while they will do well, they don't maybe do as well as some of these other like earlier opportunities. So in full like raging bull markets, I think, like you start to see people go out the risk curve, and those core assets still appreciate, it's still interesting, but they don't go up as much. I think in kind of a bear market or that sort of season that we're in now, you start to see a little bit more concentration around like value accrual. So people will start to buy the core assets like CryptoPunks or like art blocks or, like Xcopy, these sorts of things. And I think that cycle happens enough times that they sort of create their own lendiness to kind of your point, where not only do they have the history of something like CryptoPunks being made in 2017, and increasingly, like if you fast forward a couple of years, art block starts to look relatively quite old compared to other newer collections. So not only do they actually have like the duration lendiness, but you have like proof of people kind of storing value or like running to those sets of like core assets in times of crisis or when the market kind of nukes. And so I think, like there's definitely like basically a general case for value accrual to those original, objects or pieces of culture. In a way you can kind of frame it as like, here's this moment in sort of art history or culture in general, where all of a sudden there's these original digital assets that you could collect and own. And I think their lendiness is like a good case for potentially owning them or seeing value accrual to those core assets over time. But I say, that whole like fat punks thesis didn't really work out in the end, in a sense, because it, let me rephrase, I think a lot of people wanted to explore other collections and just sort of make a lot of money that way. And, I didn't see even art blocks, honestly, doing as well as it did, or Bored Apes or these other collections. I kind of had a more reductionist version of things. I thought CryptoPunks would kind of stand alone as their own thing and be, head and shoulders above the rest. And they're very important, I would say, but it turns out that, there are lots of other assets too. So, I would say maybe it did like a half truth. Like it was like mostly decently on point for a little while. And like you've said, there's kind of a case for these core NFTs to have value over time. But at the same time, you want to be open-minded and humble and realize it didn't really pan out exactly the way that I had thought.
Oh yeah. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts or opinions or stance on NFTs on other chains. I mean, this is something that is, speaking of your own blind spots, I just don't follow what's happening on Tezos or Aptos or any of these other chains. What do you think of in general of NFTs on other non-Ethereum blockchains? And then can kind of double click on that.
Yeah, for sure. I think it kind of depends. It goes back to this conversation of like, well, what kind of NFTs are we talking about? Right? Because I think if you're a company and you're building like a AAA game, well, I mean, you're going to have an NFT on a different blockchain, potentially on Solana or on a layer 2 on ETH, where transaction throughput is much higher, and you can actually like feasibly have a game that people would play. So I think like it depends if we're talking about gaming or NFTs in general, but specifically on this collectibles and art front, which is mostly where I would spend my time. I think we've seen ETH be the dominant player for a long time. Tezos be a strong second on pure art. Like FX Hash is kind of another generative art platform like Artblocks, and that's had a lot of traction. And Solana, more on this like PFP and like networked art. That's like loosely what I'm thinking about calling these things now, versus like PFP collection. It's more like a network of art where people are able to own something similar from the same collection. Solana's done quite well, right? But it's interesting because I think like the way that I think about it is they're almost like different countries, like Tezos has a very like European vibe. It's like, let's collect fine art for fun. That's indie. It sort of strikes me as I'm both Canadian and German, and I just like feel like a very sort of European sensibility around FX Hash, and they're based in Switzerland, and it kind of makes sense. Solana feels like very American, very corporate, very casino driven, right? It feels like I'm in Las Vegas, and it's very much about flipping, and the culture there is just slightly different. There's now some good projects, like shout out to, I guess, Utes is probably the first one that I've seen where you're like, this is like a real strong intentional positioning of we're like a Solana project that's taken a lot of time, money, and effort but yeah, you kind of have these different chains have different characteristics, and in the same way that you might consider investing in different countries or regions, and make have trade-offs basically accordingly. I think that's like loosely the mental model I have for exploring NFT activity on these different chains. So ETH is still like the main show, especially from an art and collectibles point of view. But I think, yeah, like there's a strong potential that like where organic culture exists, NFTs will kind of follow. And I think Solana is definitely like, in terms of like raw volume or quantitative metrics, seeing that, and Tezos to an extent as well. So those would be the three that I really follow, and to be determined. We'll see like where stuff goes, especially like as ETH scales with different layer 2s and stuff. Like maybe there's a huge NFT movement on Arbitrum or something over time, and that's what's cool. Like this isn't sort of a history lesson. Like these things are live, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I like that. I think the other one possibly could be Polygon. Just, I mean, their business development department is insane, and with this recent Reddit avatar mania, I think there's probably a decent case to be said for Polygon NFTs as well.
Yeah, good point. No, that's definitely one I missed. I think it's interesting because Polygon's like, they've won Starbucks, they've won Meta, they've won Reddit, clearly like elite BD shop over there. And so we'll see, basically, right? Like this is kind of the first play where maybe the blockchain is a bit more abstracted away from the core users, where like you could be a Reddit user and like you download the Reddit app and have a Reddit vault and collect an NFT, but not really know anything about Polygon. Where previously the sort of the money or the people who are NFT conscious like know what chain they're on. They're effectively like early users of the internet, right? Like they're the very high technical people. And so for sure, I think like there's a strong case for something like Polygon or even Solana in NFTs as they sort of abstract away to the consumer level. But I think we're still like early enough that that's more in the category of like, I'm watching it. Like I don't own any Reddit avatars, but it could be very big if it works out as they've planned.
Yeah, I mean, in general, it seems we say this all the time in crypto so much that it's a meme, but we're early. That doesn't mean everything goes up and to the right, but it is early innings with a lot of this. What needs to happen? Like, what building blocks need to exist that don't, or what regulation needs to exist that isn't quite clear? What key pieces are we missing, like as an NFT market, to take this more mainstream and have more people kind of understand and adopt NFTs?
It's a good question. I mean, I have some ideas I can kind of throw out there, but one maybe more cheeky note would be like, if I knew the exact answer, I feel like I'd be a very wealthy human, trying to figure out a way to kind of really onboard everybody would be awesome. I think mostly like it comes down to wallet and the kind of basic UI experience of being able to collect. How do I actually get money into a wallet and purchase something? I've done this with friends, I've done this with my parents, to try and like go through all these hoops. It's just hard, right? You got to get your bank account hooked up to a crypto exchange and then send that ETH to a MetaMask account. So you have to figure out how to make a MetaMask account. Then you have to know what a private key is. Then you have to figure out gas and do a transaction. There's a lot of steps to this, and really like even just to participate in that, you have to have a really early adopter mindset, or just like be quite open to new things. And I think every step, I mean, they study this in sort of in UX design, right? Like every step that you take, you kind of have attrition and people not being able to follow the plan and basically get to the actual purchase moment of an NFT. And so you see different people trying different things, whether it's like OpenSea allowing credit cards, or different wallets maybe building a phone app to make it more intuitive. And those are definitely promising. But I think from my perspective anyway, if you really want like serious users, like 100 million plus or billion plus, you're going to need something that is like as organic or as natural as like a web 2 login, whether that's like you log in with an email or something where people are comfortable being able to just like have access to a crypto account without having to do all of these different steps. And I think potentially one way of looking at this is the way that Coinbase Earn had a lot of success, just saying, hey, like maybe people aren't going to buy crypto, but they could earn it. Just like learning about it, earning a little bit of crypto could be a good way to kind of expose people to what this new kind of currency is. And I think NFTs could go through that kind of a moment too, where potentially you have like an easier wallet flow and some other way of like earning or claiming different NFTs just to get people used to it. And I think, I don't know, from a UX perspective, some of the wallet stuff, from just like at a social level, maybe like being able to collect things for free is an interesting one. And the regulation piece is definitely a specter over the industry to an extent, and that would be kind of the third bucket, which is to say like it would be good to know that an artist could issue a collection of 1,000 NFTs that they've designed, and know that that's not like a security, and they're going to get in trouble just for like a one-off sale of artworks. And I think we'll have to see how this goes over the next sort of 6 to 12 months, and see if regulators take interest in being able to offer like clearer guidelines. But yeah, some clearer guidelines and some basic UX improvements I think would go a long way. Though again, like I'm not entirely sure I'll end it there. I think there is a case for sort of protecting culture and subculture being interesting for its own sake. And so like the open question that's maybe slightly controversial is like, do you actually want everyone to come and be buying NFTs? Because I think like good subculture, can penetrate mainstream culture in a different way, in an organic way over time. And it's something interesting about crypto in general is that it actually asks you to learn a bunch of new things to kind of get into this world. And that's partly why it's a special and interesting industry. So we'll see. I'm not entirely sure how it plays out, but yeah.
Ooh, I like that actually. Teasing out that one. That's kind of a fun one, right? It's like exclusively inclusive.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Like I don't know. I think of the process of like what it took to figure out how blockchains work and try and spin up an account. And, I don't want to romanticize it, but it does feel like you're part of something, right? Where you're able to actually like do the work and learn something and be part of a new community. And, in many ways, like if you were to, rewind to like 1980, no one knew how to do anything with a computer, right? I mean, I wasn't alive at that point, but, it took some time. Like people had to figure out like, well, what is an email address and how do I use it? And so, while I have like my core answer of like, you could improve UX in some way, maybe abstract the blockchain away, give some way for people to like create or like claim NFTs for free. Those things all might help. But the other part of me says like, there's value in just being able to, have that as a subculture, and getting people to learn that might just be the new normal, right? Like to actually have people get used to using a crypto wallet, even if it's a little bit easier in 3 years from now than it is today. Like, people don't maybe want to have like recovery phrases on a sticky in front of their computer. I think, I don't know. I think there's some level of like value in pursuing technology and in like asking people to a higher standard or calling people to that, as opposed to being like, well, like everyone is really stupid in society, so we probably have to make this as obvious as possible. It's like, well, maybe, but like maybe that's boring, right?
Yeah, unfortunately, I just always think of like those user tests that you have like a website that's like click here to enter, and like you're watching people do it and they go to the website and they're like, I don't know how to enter. There is a
Yeah.
gigantic button that says click to enter. How are you missing this? But you have to redesign it that make it even more clear, I guess. So never surprised. I'd be curious, like when you're thinking through different versions of the future, and when you caveated the last time of predictions, made me think of a Ray Dalio quote that he who lives by the crystal ball will eat shattered glass. So keeping that in mind, but where could things go wrong with NFTs and adoption, and they're not widespread and adopted as we kind of think they will be?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think I think maybe the medium term risk is that these things either get regulated in such a way that it sort of like intimidates most people from participating in these markets, or like crypto at large sinks in such a big way that NFTs are just sort of seen as like part and parcel of crypto, right? Where it's like, oh, this is just like sort of the speculative gambling stuff. In the same way that if you explain to someone professionally, like even today, like, hey, like I do crypto, sometimes people might just be like, oh, like that's like the Bitcoin stuff, right? Like, do you also trade drugs on the internet? Like there's sort of like these initial stereotypes that are like latent in just talking about crypto. People have it stuck in their minds in that way. And so I don't know, this is maybe a broader commentary on like crypto innovation in general. And I think I forget who said this originally. It might have been 6529, like punk 6529, or someone else who's smarter than me, was basically like, if you look at the 1960s, psychedelics are basically, ruled out and made illegal. And it's only now, whatever, like 70 years later, that research is showing, hey, maybe like psilocybin has some positive impact on people with PTSD or depression, or like there's actually use cases for this stuff. And so I think like I would slot this like question of, what happens to the negative for NFTs, or like how does this not work out, as like, well, if all of crypto doesn't work out, and then NFTs also will fail in some fashion. And there's like still a reasonable case that, regulation comes along and says, okay, we're not going to permit like crypto to exist in any way. And as much as sort of the decentralization maxis would say, well, you can always kind of make Bitcoin persist, and, Ethereum is going to fork its validator set and it's going to be okay. Maybe, right? But if you're in a Western country, like if Europe and the US come together and say like, it's illegal to own crypto, it's illegal to hold crypto after like 30 days from now, most people are running for the exits, right? And this actually, now that I think about it, is a 6529 thread from recently, which is, maybe we can pin that in your show notes, Ben, which is like kind of making the case for how crypto fails, like what the steps would be, kind of he's gaming it out as a theoretical. And so, yeah, if crypto at large kind of hits a turning point in society and we just like don't permit that, which I think would be a great mistake, because there's lots of cool potential. And I think anyone who might be listening to this probably would agree. I think, yeah, like there is a world where like crypto at large kind of tanks, and NFTs are just sort of, like seen as part of that and fall apart along with it. That would be the main concern, because I think that's the steel man case for like how it fails. I really struggle to see that, that world playing out, because I think in so many ways, just the idea of like what we started this conversation talking about, like a digital asset, some digital representation of an item, seems so intuitive and seems like such an unlock across like so many business verticals, forget crypto specifically, that I think, yeah, like even if the NFT, quote unquote NFT space doesn't look like what it does today, I would struggle to see, a world 3, 5, 7, 10 years from now where the concept of a digital item of scarcity is not used pretty widely.
Well, when said like that, yeah, I got to reach out to you and get that link, and I'll put that in the show notes. What right now are you most obsessed with within, it can be the broader crypto market or NFTs?
That's a good question. I think, yeah, my sense is like I would split this into a couple different buckets. I don't have a singular point of obsession at the moment, so I'll tuck that aside. But I do think what I've spent a lot of my time on is trying to figure out how gaming works or could work using NFTs. So there's a on-chain example of something called Realms, which is building on Starknet. This is sort of arises out of the loot ecosystem. So this idea of like let's push the boundaries and see what we can do and have like a fully quote unquote on-chain gaming experience where like all the items, and in this case like there's some land in that universe, there are characters, there's like resources, like what happens when all of it is on chain? Like can we make that work? Can kind of an economy work? Can kind of like a permanent and perpetual game system work? Can you create an ecosystem where other people can build on top of that game in some fashion? That is like something that really kind of interests me. And I think it's also just interesting to see someone take a real run at trying to build a game as well as use crypto. It's not, I feel like for the most part, my experience is crypto gaming is kind of ghettoized, where it's like, let's like be crypto people and try and make a game out of this, instead of like, let's be gaming people, or let's be like equal parts at minimum, gaming people and crypto people, and try and build a good product that is interesting for people. And so Realms has been kind of a point of interest around NFTs. I think I'm still really interested in generative, and my kind of price range has been more FX hash recently on Tezos. And I say that because it's like quite, relatively speaking, quite cheap. And you can buy some stuff, for a lot of stuff actually, for under $100, and participate in kind of a minting process and just like learn how generative art works. So something I wouldn't say that's an obsession, but I would say that's like a bear market pastime where I like still sort of collecting stuff, and that makes it much more reasonable, to weekly go and collect a piece of art in some way and support artists. But yeah, I think on the NFT front, those are maybe my two answers. I don't have a good mental model for it. I do still broadly think about NFTs in that nerd culture versus hype culture kind of binary. And so I would say, like, right now I'm sort of more in the nerd culture side of things. And that's the kind of area of NFTs that I'm interested in. So another project I can throw out there is Forgotten Runes Wizard Cult, which sounds like a mouthful, but it's potentially one of the coolest NFT projects around, in my opinion. And I think in many ways it's because it sort of like captures nerd culture in the best and most interesting ways. And so what you have is this collection of 10,000 wizards, and there's sort of follow-on collections and things. And they're creating, and they've really said as much in their own words, like they want to create like a top 10 fantasy ever, like where they're talking like Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, like Dungeons and Dragons, like that level of like brand. It just so happens that it starts in kind of the Ethereum universe. And seeing what they've been able to do, and to like use NFTs, I guess it's like slightly adjacent to NFTs, but to just like actually use NFTs to craft something of that stature, or of that scale. Obviously they're not there yet, but they're, deep in the process of like building a game and doing all sorts of different things, and having a TV show. They're kind of the one of the first examples that I actually throw out there in these like dinner party conversations with people who aren't in crypto in any way. Because you're just basically using NFTs as a way to like have IP that you actually own, and you can kind of think about the addressable market of something like Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings, or just fantasy in general, and there being like quite a clear lane, in my opinion anyway, for like a fantasy based NFT project. And so that's a smattering of answers, but that's some of the things that I've spent some time thinking about recently.
I love it. Those are some good ones. Well, Ben, it's been a good conversation. Anything else you want to touch on before we wrap this thing up?
No, I think we've covered some good ground. I would just say, I think where I'm at the moment is I'm enjoying just like seeing the people who have stuck around given like crazy market conditions, and just trying to geek out and learn as much as I can about, new things in the space, ways that people are pushing it forward, particularly obviously around NFTs. And I think while, it might be a tricky short and medium term here, there's just a lot of cool stuff going on for people who are willing to kind of look and dig in. And that's what I plan on doing over the next, 6 to 12 months, and excited to see what happens in the industry.
Indeed. And it's actually it sucks when all of your assets go down by 75%, but the good people are sticking around, and there's a little bit more like quiet, except for today, to kind of work on some big interesting things. Lastly, where can listeners find out more about you, Good Minds, or wherever else you would like to direct them?
Yeah, awesome. I think Twitter is probably the best place. So I'm at BenRoy _, and that's usually where I'm posting a lot of stuff that I'm thinking about, or running Twitter Spaces and things. Good Minds is at Good Minds NFT. So that's kind of one of my main projects at the moment, and we do run like a Good Minds Mondays Twitter Space with different NFT projects and artists and entrepreneurs each Monday. So those are fun if people are interested. But yeah, mostly on Twitter, man.
Awesome, Ben. Been a pleasure. Really appreciate having you on today.
There you have it. Thank you for listening. I really appreciate your support. Show notes, transcript, links, and more can be found on our website at altassetallocation.com. If you'd be so kind, please share this with anyone you think might be interested or get some value from this conversation. If you have any questions or comments, please reach out. I'm always happy to hear them. Lastly, if you're on YouTube, please like the video or subscribe to the channel. If you're listening to the audio version of this, please subscribe to the podcast and or leave a review. This really helps more people find the podcast, and I really appreciate it. Thanks again, and hope you have a fantastic day. Happy investing.